On the 1st of February, 2026, a trail of blood stained Nancy Guthrie's front porch and wound its way down her driveway. Her security camera had been manually destroyed at exactly 1:47 in the morning. Inside, the medication authorities stated she needed to survive the next 24 hours remained untouched on the kitchen counter. The timer on her life began ticking the second detectives pulled up. 13 days. Into the investigation, a Pima County Sheriff's deputy actually guided a pool cleaning team into the backyard of that very crime scene. The vendor, Ambiance Pool Service and Supplies, had no prior history at the residence. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was nowhere near finished processing the site. Yet, in the ensuing weeks, pizza delivery drivers pulled up to the curb. A landscaping crew hauled equipment across the lawn, and members of the press marched right up to the front entrance, snapping photos of blood spatter still clearly visible on the pavement. But that breach of protocol wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't even the worst of it. Over the course of the next 30 days, a disturbing chain of command failure began to surface. From the mishandling of DNA evidence to the illogical boundaries of the search perimeter to sensitive details leaked to the media prematurely, the botched operation has triggered a firestorm of condemnation from retired federal agents, veteran homicide detectives, a past Arizona Supreme Court justice, and even the sheriff's own rank and file. This broadcast dissects that systemic failure. Every single fact presented here is sourced from public record, identified experts, and the sheriff's own on-camera admissions. By the time we finish, you will see clearly why the greatest barrier to locating Nancy Guthrie might not be her abductor. It begins at ground zero. On February 1st, Nancy Guthrie was flagged as a missing person near midday after failing to arrive at a friend's residence for a church broadcast. Patrol units responded. Then, the sheriff arrived personally, a move he later admitted to. Journalists was highly irregular. He stated, quote, "You do not typically get the sheriff out at a scene like this." He added, "There is something that is not right here." He didn't call homicide detectives as a safety measure. He called them because he knew. The sheriff noted he almost never escalates a missing person report that quickly. From hour one, the agency understood the gravity of the situation. Blood stained the entryway. Blood trailed down the drive. The surveillance feed was violently cut at 1:47 in the morning. Nancy's life-sustaining pills sat forgotten on the counter. The sheriff publicly confirmed that without that dosage, she could be dead within 24 hours. It was a death sentence. The timeline was critical the second the siren lights flashed. But to understand the failure here, we need to discuss a concept of forensic science that rarely crosses the public mind. It is known as Locard's exchange principle. Formulated over 100 years ago, this theory is the bedrock of criminal investigation across the globe. It dictates that every contact leaves a trace. Any individual entering an environment inevitably leaves a part of themselves behind. They deposit skin cells, hair follicles, clothing fibers, dirt from their treads, and biological material. Simultaneously, they take microscopic evidence with them when they leave. It is an immutable law of physics. Applied to a homicide investigation, the implication is stark. Every single unauthorized visitor who steps past the yellow tape corrupts the scene. Their genetic markers mingle with the perpetrators. Their footwear obliterates the killer's tracks. Their clothing, fibers, settle onto the very surfaces the attacker touched. And with every new layer of foreign material, the forensic story becomes impossible to decipher. When these cases reach a courtroom, defense counsel does not have to prove an alibi. They only need to demonstrate that the investigation site was so hopelessly contaminated that the evidence is junk. This is why perimeters are sacred. This is why access logs are mandatory. It is why you record the name of every soul who steps inside. But that is not what happened at the Guthrie residence. The site was not immediately locked down with barrier tape to restrict public entry. News crews walked right up to the structure, capturing high-definition images of blood on the porch. Blood, the sheriff, later verified was Nancy's. Sergeant Aaron Cross, president of the Pima County Deputies Organization, the union representing the sheriff's own force, gave a scathing statement to the New York Post. He called the scene management unprofessional. He stated plainly, "It does not look good for our department," with media personnel wandering the grounds and effectively destroying the integrity of the scene. The initial forensic sweep was wrapped up in what the sheriff claimed was nearly 20 hours. Then, they released the house. Michael Alcazar, a retired NYPD detective and professor at John Jay College, appeared on CNN to suggest that investigators likely dropped the ball a little bit by surrendering the scene so quickly. Yet that release was merely the prologue to a contamination disaster that compounded daily. Forensic death investigator Joe Scott Morgan, the host of Body Bags, a veteran who has spent a lifetime analyzing complex mortality cases alongside medical examiners, tracked the aftermath of that premature release. The property became a thoroughfare. Journalists roamed the yard. Social media vloggers trailed behind. Pool technicians were personally walked in by law enforcement. Landscaping crews dragged gear through the backyard. Takeout food was delivered. To the front door, a home healthcare aide stopped by. Morgan noted the complete absence of a sentry. He stated there was simply no one. From his perspective, the failure started immediately. Standard operating procedure for a high-stakes felony scene isn't a suggestion. It is a rigid script. You don't just lock down the residence. You cordon off the entire acreage. You establish a tactical command center. You station a sentry at the tape with a single, non-negotiable directive. Document every soul entering or exiting that zone. Names, timestamps, duration. No free passes. Not for the sheriff, not for the police chief, not for anyone. That is the only way to forge a chain of custody that survives a defense attorney's scrutiny. But on this property, those rules were ignored. The fallout isn't hypothetical. It is catastrophic. According to Morgan, detectives are now staring down an obstacle that exceeds the capabilities of every forensic lab in Florida. They have lost the ability to authenticate the origin of their genetic evidence. Every single individual who stepped onto that land left a trace, shedding skin cells, hair follicles, clothing fibers, and boot prints that created a chaotic mixture with the perpetrator's own biological signature. Morgan warned that the very DNA they hope will crack this investigation might simply belong to the pool maintenance worker. While this contamination played out, federal agents stumbled upon a surveillance camera mounted on the roof, a device completely missed during the initial. Consider the irony. In an investigation where a grainy doorbell clip became the holy grail of evidence, the defining image, broadcast nationwide, another lens was watching from the rooftop, unnoticed and untouched by the first response team. The oversight was so severe that the Bureau had to fly in engineers from Google to try and salvage data from the device. Later, the sheriff conceded to the Associated Press that releasing the crime scene back to the family so quickly was likely a mistake. Then there is the forensic disaster regarding the DNA, because this is where the mismanagement turns critical. The biological samples harvested from Nancy's property were routed to a commercial lab in Florida, bypassing the elite FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. To understand the gravity of this decision, you have to understand what Quantico represents. The Bureau's facility at Quantico isn't just a lab. It is one of the most sophisticated forensic nerve centers on the planet. It houses specialized units with rapid response protocols built specifically for abduction scenarios. Because when someone is taken, time isn't merely a factor. It is the only variable that decides if a victim is recovered breathing or in a body bag. The sheriff admitted to NBC News that separating the mixed DNA profiles could drag on for weeks, months, or even a full year at the private Florida facility. Those were his exact estimates, the optimistic end of that timeline. Weeks is already in the rearview mirror. The pessimistic projection pushes results to February 2027, a year after Nancy vanished. In 12 months, security servers at local businesses wipe their drives. Memories fade and witnesses lose clarity. Suspects relocate. Digital footprints erode. Carriers purge cell tower logs. The entire forensic landscape surrounding the abduction rots away with every passing week. This is exactly why Quantico mandates high-speed analysis for abductions. It is not a favor. It is a tactical requirement. And there is another layer to this stalling that is deeply concerning. The glove discovered 2 miles from the residence, the one the feds insist is real, while the sheriff claims it yielded no DNA profile of an unidentified male. They ran that sample through CODIS, the national database containing over 19 million genetic files of known criminals. It came back clean, which implies the individual who wore that glove has never been booked for a felony that mandated a genetic swab. But a lack of a hit doesn't render the evidence obsolete. It signals a need to shift tactics to investigative genetic genealogy. This is the groundbreaking method that unmasked the Golden State Killer after 4 decades and linked Brian Kohberger to the Idaho slayings. C.C. Moore, the lead genetic genealogist at Parabon, Nanolabs told the Today Show that if she were the perpetrator, she would be sweating. But this science demands a viable genetic sequence. And every week that the Florida lab wastes untangling mixed, degraded samples is lost time. That profile isn't being constructed, it isn't being uploaded to GEDmatch, and it isn't being cross-referenced with the millions of citizens who have opted to share their ancestry data. The clock isn't just ticking on the detective work, it is ticking on the science itself. When pressed on why he routed crucial evidence to a local lab instead of Quantico, the sheriff claimed the workflow had been established with the Florida facility from day one. He argued he didn't want to fracture the chain of custody between 2 different agencies, creating a situation where pieces of the puzzle were scattered. But there is a much more sinister issue with the DNA evidence than simply where it is being tested. On February 14th, a federal source leaked to News Nation that the sheriff was actively obstructing federal agents from examining critical items, including a glove found inside Nancy's own home. That same day, the sheriff appeared on Fox News and stated, "We never removed a glove from that residence." He insisted, "There is no glove. We never had a glove in that house. We never recovered a glove on that property." The Bureau's statement to News Nation explicitly cited a glove located inside the dwelling. The sheriff's televised rebuttal explicitly denied its very existence. One of these narratives is reality. The other is a lie. And in an investigation demanding the public place their faith in the authorities, this isn't just a minor clerical error. It is a fundamental fracture in the cracked foundation. Former Arizona Supreme Court Justice Andrew Gould weighed in on the handling of evidence on Fox News, and his assessment was brutal. He believes the sheriff committed critical errors that actively obstructed the probe. The specific term used by one of the state's highest legal minds was impeded. Not complicated, not slowed, impeded. Now, let's map out where the narrative begins to fracture, because the mishandled glove and the DNA evidence are just the opening chapter. On February 16th, the sheriff publicly exonerated the entire Guthrie clan, siblings and spouses alike, stripping them of suspect status. He told 13 News, "Not one single person in the family is a suspect," he declared to the world, effective immediately. That the speculation had to end. They were victims, he insisted. To suggest otherwise wasn't just inaccurate, it was cruel. Yet, 11 days prior, during a press conference broadcast by Fox News, the sheriff faced questions regarding online theories implicating a family member. His response then was chillingly standard. "Everybody is still a suspect in our spot." And that, he claimed, is simply how police operate. He used the absolute term, everybody. And despite the public clearance, throughout the investigation, detectives revisited Annie Guthrie and Tomaso Chion's residence repeatedly. They seized mail with latex-gloved hands, sealing it into evidence bags. They executed search warrants on a property where the abduction did not take place. You cannot stand before the cameras and shame the public for suspecting the family while your own investigators continue to toss their homes and bag their personal effects. It is a binary reality. Either the family is cleared, or they are not. Either your detectives are burning resources, searching a house with zero evidentiary value, or your public declaration of innocence was premature. Both scenarios cannot exist simultaneously. This ties into a deeper structural failure that insiders have quietly flagged. Sergeant Cross went on record stating the FBI should have assumed command of the case within the first 48 hours. He identified the Bureau as the world's premier agency for kidnapping resolutions. He noted their superior manpower and assets, arguing the Sheriff's Department should have relegated itself to a support capacity. But for the FBI to take the lead, they require a doorway, either a federal crime, designation, or a direct invitation from local authorities or the family. The Guthrie family did not issue that plea publicly, and the sheriff, a man nursing an 11-year grudge against the Bureau, was certainly not offering the reins. He told News Nation that the idea of him refusing the FBI is crazy, but there is a massive distinction between saying no and actually handing over the keys. You can cooperate without ceding control, and cooperation without authority is exactly what sources describe. The FBI supplying the heavy lifting, manpower, and tech, while the sheriff's office hoarded the decision-making power over the forensics, the labs, the communication strategy, and the search grid. On February 23rd, these contradictions hit the national airwaves. 4 major networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN, reported via independent law enforcement sources that the masked intruder had stalked Nancy's doorstep on multiple occasions prior to the abduction. The proof was allegedly in the FBI's surveillance photos. One image depicts the suspect equipped with a tactical backpack and a holstered firearm. Another shows a similar figure sans equipment. 4 networks, 4 independent sources, all corroborating the same disturbing detail. The Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a written rebuttal, dismissing the reports as pure speculation, claiming no dates or timestamps were linked to the images. But 4 major news organizations do not simultaneously hallucinate the same false narrative based on fabricated sources. That simply does not happen. What actually happens is that investigators leak the truth to reporters on background, and then leadership issues a sanitized statement, contradicting what their own boots on the ground know to be true. The result is a chaotic landscape where the public cannot discern fact from fiction, because the architects of the investigation cannot agree on the basic reality. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent James Gagliano diagnosed this structural rot on Fox News. He observed that the sheriff was conducting solo interviews with various outlets, feeding each one a slightly different piece of the puzzle. He noted that information was trickling out in fits and starts. Statements were walked back. Facts were delivered incorrectly. He warned that this is precisely how you lose control of the narrative in a case of this magnitude. Rather than holding unified briefings where every journalist receives the same facts simultaneously, the sheriff held court separately with Fox, NBC, the Daily Mail, the BBC, and News Nation. Each session birthed a slightly variant version of the truth. The public was left to stitch together conflicting accounts from a single source. And now, we turn to the pacemaker. This may be the singular, most consequential failure of the first 30 days. Nancy it was a digital lifeline that did more than regulate a heartbeat. It synced data directly to her Apple devices via Bluetooth. Then, at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, the connection severed. That silence meant one of two things. Nancy had been taken out of range, or the machine was tampered with. By the middle of February, the media broke a story that changed the landscape of the investigation. The FBI had deployed a helicopter rigged with a specialized Bluetooth sniffer, a piece of tech designed to hunt for the specific electronic signature of Nancy's pacemaker from the sky. The mechanics of the operation are chillingly simple. The chopper runs a tight grid pattern, sweeping over the desert scrub, the quiet residential streets, and the vast, empty stretches of rural land on the city's edge. If that device pulses even a whisper of a signal, the airborne tech can lock onto the coordinates instantly. They didn't need a warrant for the airspace. There were no ground units to spook a suspect. It was silent, invisible, and precise enough to potentially pinpoint the exact building where she was being held. If Nancy was still breathing, if she was anywhere within that flight path, this was the ace in the hole. It was the only way to find her without the abductor realizing the net was closing in. But that tactical advantage was burned when the press ran the story before the mission was complete, before the grid was fully swept, before the trap could actually snap shut. I need you to process the tactical reality of that leak. If you are holding a captive and you see on the nightly news that law enforcement is tracking her heart monitor from the clouds, your window of opportunity shrinks instantly. You have options. You can kill the signal. Wrap the device in foil, build a makeshift Faraday cage with a cardboard box and aluminum. That kills the transmission. Or, if you have the stomach for brutality, you cut it out. Maybe you move the hostage to a location beyond the publicized search zone. Or you take the darkest path and eliminate the source of the signal for good. Any defensive move the perpetrator made after that report, if they made one, was a direct result of the fact that the existence of the sniffer was leaked before the job was done. A stealth weapon relies on secrecy. The moment it became a headline, it was rendered obsolete. Gagliano didn't mince words about the failure. He noted that sometimes transparency just hands the playbook to the bad guys. He argued that the communication strategy, a case of this magnitude, was fundamentally flawed. It's still a mystery whether the leak sprang from a local deputy or a federal agent. Fox News broke the story on a Saturday. An FBI source later confirmed the advanced tech to News Nation. The source of the leak hasn't been identified, but the catastrophic damage occurred before anyone could point a finger. Then there is the issue of the physical perimeter. Detectives drew a 2-mile circle around Nancy's residence and started their canvass, pulling surveillance tapes only from homes inside that bubble. But Elias and Danielle Strategoulis live roughly 2.5 miles out on a quiet strip called Camino Real. It's a back road that bypasses every major traffic light between the Guthrie subdivision and the highways leading out of town. It is exactly the escape route a perpetrator would choose at 2:30 in the morning to remain unseen. Their surveillance camera logged 12 cars passing between midnight and 6 a.m. on February 1st. One of those cars rolled through at 2:36 a.m. Remember, the pacemaker went dark at 2:28 a.m. NBC's Liz Kuitz drove the route from Nancy's driveway to the Strategoulis camera. It's a 6-minute drive. The math lines up perfectly. A 2:28 disconnect plus 6 minutes. On the road puts the car there at 2:34. The camera saw it at 2:36. That leaves a 2-minute buffer. That is the exact margin you expect if the driver hesitated at the end of the street, checked the rear view, ensured the coast was clear, and then gunned it onto Camino Real, disappearing into the dark. Retired NYPD Detective Pat Brown analyzed the video. He identified the vehicle as a Kia Soul. It's a compact crossover, common, quiet, the type of car that wouldn't warrant a second look from an insomniac neighbor in the dead of night. But the smoking gun isn't the video itself. It is the The fact that the Strategoulis home sits just outside that arbitrary 2-mile line, law enforcement never knocked on their door. No one asked to see their tapes. The couple came forward only after seeing the story on the news. They checked their own system, found the clip, and handed it to investigators on a silver platter. The implication is terrifying. How many other cameras sitting between the 2 and 5-mile mark held critical evidence that was overwritten because the search radius was half a mile too small? Profilers estimate that Nancy's remains will likely be recovered within 2 to 5 miles of her home, based on statistical abduction patterns. By capping the canvas at 2 miles, they ignored the zone where the answers are most likely to be found. The sheriff admitted on February 27th, 26 days into the case, that they are finally looking at vehicles in the wider perimeter. The Madres Buscadoras de Sonora. Then, the Madres Buscadoras arrived in Arizona. For those not in the know, this is a Mexican volunteer unit with a haunting resume. Over 5,000 bodies recovered. Much of that work is done in the Sonoran dust, a terrain that mirrors the unforgiving landscape around Tucson. They understand the desert's silence. They know how to read the washes, the arroyos, the specific patches of earth where the ground conceals a secret. They came to Arizona with a single objective: to find Nancy, but the sheriff's department shut them down. The official statement claimed that volunteer groups needed to give investigators space, insisting this was a job best left to professionals. Think about that. 5,000 recoveries. Desert. Expertise the local police simply do not possess. Zero cost to the taxpayer. And while the Madres were being turned away at the door, the 911 communication center was collapsing. Between February 1st and February 19th, the department fielded more than 32,000 calls. Nearly 24,000 were purely administrative, a massive spike compared to the 9,000 recorded during the same window the previous year. You had tips, opinions, wild conspiracy theories, and genuine life or death emergencies all choking the same lines. No, dedicated tip infrastructure was built in those critical early days. The FBI tip line eventually absorbed more than 40,000 leads, but the golden hour, those essential first weeks, had already burned out. Reports also surfaced that despite public assurances regarding coordination with Mexican authorities, a standard move given Tucson's proximity to the border, and the very real possibility Nancy had been trafficked south, Mexican officials told the press the phone never rang. No formal FBI request was ever filed. The American side claimed they were talking. The Mexican side claimed radio silence. Just one more discrepancy in a case defined by them. Now, I need to show you a piece of history that ties this entire narrative together. Because the pattern you are witnessing, the Florida lab instead of Quantico, the stiff arm to the FBI, the friction between the sheriff's public statements and what federal sources whisper in private, that pattern has an origin point. It starts 11 years before Nancy Guthrie vanished. In 2015, the FBI launched a probe into the Pima County Sheriff's Department regarding the misappropriation of RICO funds. Civil asset forfeiture is a legal mechanism allowing law enforcement to seize cash and property linked to crimes. By law, that money is earmarked for approved enforcement purposes, equipment, tactical training, operations, but that is not what federal investigators found. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in seized assets had been siphoned off. We are talking awards, banquets, dinners, and $20,000 dropped on a commercial kitchen upgrade so a cafe could operate inside the department. A cafe, incidentally, reportedly managed by the niece of high-ranking brass. Chief Deputy Chris Radke was indicted on federal charges for the misuse of those funds. Radke sat directly below the sheriff in the chain of command. The indictment hit the national wire, and in 2016, with the investigation still hot, Radke, who had become a primary person of interest, took his own life. The man at the top at that time was Sheriff Chris Nanos, He wasn't indicted. He was not charged. But the investigation happened on his watch, and the damage it did to his relationship with the Bureau has been corroborated by people inside the building. During the probe, Nanos sat down with KGUN, a local Tucson station, and torched the investigation. He called the FBI's work garbage. He stated he was absolutely furious at the Bureau. He challenged them to stand up when the dust settled and admit the entire thing was total BS. He wasn't diplomatic. He was visibly enraged on camera. Former Chief Deputy Richard Castigar later told the Daily Mail that Nanos holds a deep disdain for the FBI. He said Nanos has been nursing a grudge since that 2015 case. Now, layer that history over the facts in this video. The DNA shipped to a private Florida lab instead of the FBI's world-class facility at Quantico. The federal agent telling News Nation the sheriff is blocking access to evidence. The sheriff denying it on Fox News. The individual interviews producing conflicting versions of the same reality. The search perimeter that remained stagnant for 26 days. The rejection of the Madres Buscadoras. The pacemaker telemetry leaked before the analysis was even finished. The crime scene released before the FBI completed its forensic sweep. I am not drawing a straight line. Between 2015 and 2026, I am simply placing two timelines side by side. The first timeline is a federal corruption probe that ended in an indictment, a suicide, and a sheriff going on television to call the Bureau's work garbage. The second timeline is a kidnapping case where that same sheriff made a series of tactical decisions that, according to his own deputies, his former colleagues, a retired Arizona Supreme Court justice, and retired FBI agents actively impeded the search for a missing woman. You can look at these two maps and decide they are unrelated. That is your prerogative. But the people inside that building have already made their call. 98% of the deputies, long before Nancy Guthrie vanished into the desert silence, the rank and file at the Pima County Sheriff's Department had already cast their verdict. 85 out of 86 deputies voted no confidence in Chris Nanos. Union President Cross didn't hold back, labeling the administration a monument to ego. An insider described the sheriff's handling of the investigation not as police work, but as a rolling circus. Former Chief Deputy Richard Carmona was equally blunt, noting that while the detectives are grinding through the hours and deputies are scouring the terrain, focused entirely on the mission, the leadership has failed them. We are witnessing a catastrophic void where senior command should be, he stated. Robin Drake, a retired FBI special agent who once spearheaded the Bureau's counterintelligence behavioral analysis program, provided a psychological profile that might just unlock the chaos we are seeing. Drake theorizes that Nanos has become an unintentional noise black hole, a singularity that absorbs every ounce of media, oxygen, and controversy, ensuring the lens remains fixed on the sheriff rather than illuminating the hard evidence. Whether this is calculated design or systemic collapse, the outcome is identical. The sheriff has consumed the narrative. The story is now about Nanos, his contradictions, his press tours, his erratic decisions. It is no longer about the forensic traces, the surveillance tapes, the suspect, or Nancy herself. Drake further suggests that the staggering 98% no confidence vote has fractured the chain of command, creating a dynamic where investigators may be firewalling their own sheriff. If the case agents suspect that intel shared with Nanos will be leaked in a solo interview with a reporter by dawn twisted out of context, released prematurely, or negated entirely by a contradictory, the statement he gives to a rival network. They protect the file by cutting off the flow of information upward. The sheriff takes the podium, armed only with fragments. His statements are obsolete the moment they air. The press latches onto the card. Discrepancies. and the search for truth drowns in static, while the real police work bypasses the sheriff entirely. The professionals in the trenches deserve to be distinguished from this spectacle. The investigators scrubbing through 10,000 hours of video, frame by agonizing frame, the federal agents tracing genetic genealogy from fragmented DNA strings, the forensic experts isolating complex mixed samples in the lab, the deputies pounding on doors across the Catalina foothills. These men and women are executing their duty in a theater of operations sabotaged by their own commander. CNN's chief law enforcement analyst, John Miller, correctly noted that this file is far from cold. He is right. The scientific machinery required to close this case is already in place. It is running, and thankfully, it operates independently of the sheriff's press briefings. The critical question isn't whether the truth will surface, but whether the chaotic decisions from the top added fatal days, weeks, or months to the clock. In a scenario where Nanos himself admitted Nancy might not survive 24 hours without her meds, and where profiles suggest she likely perished within 72 hours of the abduction, wasted time is not a clerical error. It is the brutal distinction between a rescue mission and a body recovery. It is the gap between swift justice and a cold case where the evidence has rotted away, making a conviction nearly impossible. 3 days into the search, the sheriff made a statement to the press that haunts this entire timeline. He admitted, "I am not used to everyone hanging on my every word and then holding me accountable for what I say." In that moment, he was absolutely correct. He wasn't accustomed to oversight. This is a man who suspended his political rival weeks before an election he scraped by with just 481 votes. He sidelined the union president for holding a placard reading "Deputies don't want nanos." 98% of his own force declared no confidence in his command long before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Yet, none of those internal tremors triggered the prize avalanche of scrutiny he faces today. The Guthrie case changed the rules. Now, the nation's eyes are locked on Arizona. And what the public sees is a leader who bypassed the FBI to send critical DNA to a private facility, a sheriff who denied the existence of a glove that federal agents confirm was recovered, a man who publicly exonerated the family while his own detectives were quietly raiding their homes. He told the media on February 5th that everyone remained a suspect, only to turn around on February 16th and declare that suspecting the family was cruel. He issued a written statement contradicting 4 major news networks. He leaked details about the pacemaker tracking technology before the data could be fully utilized. He established a search perimeter that failed to include the one camera that likely captured the suspect's vehicle. He rejected the assistance of a volunteer group boasting 5,000 recoveries worth of desert search experience. He claimed on camera to be coordinating with Mexico, while authorities across the border stated plainly that nobody had called them. Someone out there holds the key. The evidence sitting in sterile labs, buried in servers, and frozen on surveillance drives that have yet to be analyzed isn't going anywhere. It waits. The only variable is how much of a head start the person who took Nancy has been gifted to cover their tracks. Hit subscribe, enable notifications, and drop a comment below. Do you believe the chaos in this investigation is mere incompetence or something far darker? Because in the next upload, we are going somewhere there's a heavy, suffocating sense of anticipation hanging in the air. And when the hammer finally drops, trust me, you will want to be here to witness the fallout. In the quiet hours of a February morning, a 50-year legacy of peace was shattered in mere minutes. The disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old grandmother whose life-saving medication was left untouched on her counter, is not just a tragic headline. It is a profound reminder of the fragility of the safety we often take for granted. When blood is found on a porch and a home stands empty, the silence that follows is a call to our collective conscience. This tragedy teaches us that it couldn't happen here is a dangerous illusion. True security is not found in locks or cameras alone, but in the unwavering vigilance of a community that refuses to look away. We must be the eyes for our elders and the shield for the vulnerable. Let Nancy's story be a wake-up call to strengthen our bonds. Justice relies on our courage to speak up and our commitment to look out for one another. In the face of darkness, our greatest weapon is a connected, alert, and compassionate community. We must ensure that no one is ever truly alone, and that every life is guarded with the respect and vigilance it deserves.